The shock was just too cold. Instead, she methodically printed the confirmation, her movements eerily calm, like a woman whose world had already ended. She packed a single bag, not with frantic panic, but with a chilling sense of purpose, when Mark finally walked through the door 2 hours later, carrying a sad-looking bouquet of roses and spinning some lazy story about a client meeting. She was just sitting on the sofa, waiting. Before we get into today's story, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of this one. Trust me, the karma here is served piping hot, and oh, is it delicious. Picture this. It's what should have been a happy 5th wedding anniversary, and Elara is putting the finishing touches on a surprise dinner. She's spent the entire day recreating their very first date, right down to the same music playing softly in the background. Her husband, Mark, was working late, a phrase she was getting a little too used to hearing. While doing a final check of her email for a gift certificate, she stumbled down a rabbit hole. There, on their shared cloud account, wasn't a work document. It was a PDF. A confirmation for a penthouse suite at the Azure, the most exclusive hotel in the city. The reservation wasn't for some future getaway, though. It was for tonight. And the booking wasn't for Mr. and Mrs. Collins. It was for Mark Collins and his assistant. In that one soul-crushing moment, Elara realized her marriage wasn't just in a rough patch, it was a complete and utter lie. But instead of falling apart, something cold and hard began to form in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't the end. Oh no, this was the beginning. The beginning of a revenge plot so perfect, it would lead her right into the arms of the one man her husband was terrified of, his untouchable, mysterious, and ridiculously wealthy boss. Elara had literally built her entire world around Mark. She'd been a brilliant graphic designer with a fiery passion, but when Mark's career at the financial giant Sterling West started taking off, she willingly took a step back. She packed away her portfolio, swapped her design software for dinner party planning, and threw herself into being the perfect, supportive wife. She managed their social life, charmed his bosses, and created this perfect home for him to climb the corporate ladder. She was the invisible engine behind his success, and she'd told herself it was a partnership. Now, staring at that hotel confirmation, the word partnership felt like a joke. The life she'd so carefully built was a sham. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Not yet. The shock was just too cold. Instead, she methodically printed the confirmation, her movements eerily calm, like a woman whose world had already ended. She packed a single bag, not with frantic panic, but with a chilling sense of purpose, when Mark finally walked through the door 2 hours later, carrying a sad-looking bouquet of roses and spinning some lazy story about a client meeting. She was just sitting on the sofa, waiting. She didn't say a word. She just handed him the piece of paper, the color instantly drained from his face. For a split second, you could see the pure, unadulterated fear in his eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by something so much uglier, annoyance. He went straight to the cheater's playbook. Chapter 1, Gaslight. Elara, what even is this? Are you spying on me now? This is insane, he scoffed, trying to go on the offensive. You've always been so insecure. But his words had no effect on her anymore. The spell was broken. The reservation is for tonight, Mark. Is this my anniversary gift? A night out with your assistant, she asked, her voice completely flat, stripped of all its usual warmth. He tried to backtrack, to spin a new lie about a company booking or a mistake, anything. But the details were right there in black and white. Finally, cornered and exposed, he dropped the act. But there was no apology. No regret. Just irritation. Fine, he snapped, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. It's a fling, Elara. It doesn't mean anything. Don't be so dramatic. We can work through this. Don't be so dramatic. The words echoed in the apartment she had worked so hard to make a home. He wasn't sorry he did it. He was just sorry he got caught. And that was the exact moment the last little flicker of love she had for him died out. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked to the door. We won't be working through anything, she said, her voice finally trembling, not with sadness, but with rage. You and I are done. She walked out, leaving him standing there in the ruins of their 5-year lie. The smell of her anniversary dinner still hanging in the air. Elara didn't go home that night. She checked into a modest hotel across town, her mind racing, but strangely clear. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about Mark's needs, Mark's career, or Mark's image. She was thinking about survival. The next morning, reality hit hard. She had no access to their shared accounts. No recent work experience to fall back on. Mark hadn't just cheated, he'd quietly positioned himself as the center of her entire life. But Elara wasn't helpless. She still had her mind. And she still had information. Sterling West was infamous for one thing above all else: its elusive CEO. Julian Ashcroft. A billionaire. Brilliant. Ruthless. And terrifying to everyone who worked under him. Mark practically worshipped the man. He spoke about Julian with a mix of admiration and fear. One wrong move around him, and your career could vanish overnight. Elara remembered every dinner, every fundraiser, every corporate event she'd attended by Mark's side. She'd watched Julian from a distance. Always observant. Always listening more than speaking, and she remembered something else too. Julian noticed her, not in a flirtatious way. In an interesting way. He'd once complimented her insight on branding strategy during a casual conversation. Mark had laughed it off at the time. But Julian hadn't. That memory planted a seed. Elara didn't want revenge in the dramatic sense. She wanted justice. And she wanted her life back. She reached out to an old contact from her design days. Within a week, she had freelance work lined up. It wasn't glamorous. But it was hers. Then came the boldest move she'd ever made. She emailed Julian Ashcroft directly. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't desperate. It was professional. Clear. Confident. She thanked him for past conversations, briefly explained her background, and attached her portfolio. No mention of Mark. No mention of betrayal. She hit send and expected nothing. 2 days later, her phone buzzed. A reply. Julian didn't waste words. He asked to meet. Elara's hands shook as she read the message. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was a transformation. When they met, Julian listened. Really listened. He asked about her work, her ideas, her ambitions. For the first time in years, no one interrupted her. No one minimized her. At the end of the meeting, Julian smiled slightly. I was wondering when you'd stop hiding, he said calmly. And just like that, Elara realized something terrifying and exhilarating. Mark hadn't been the powerful one in their marriage. She had simply dimmed herself so he could shine. Working with Julian changed everything for Elara. What started as a professional collaboration quickly became something deeper. Though neither of them acknowledged it at first, Julian was demanding, but fair. He challenged her ideas, pushed her creatively, and expected excellence. Unlike Mark, he never talked over her or dismissed her instincts. Elara found herself staying late, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. For the first time in years, her mind felt alive again. They talked about business at first, then about books, art, travel. Julian shared very little about his personal life. But when he did, it was thoughtful and measured. He never overshared. He never crossed a line, and that restraint made Elara trust him even more. Meanwhile, Mark was unraveling. He called nonstop. Texted apologies mixed with anger. Threats mixed with pleas. When he found out Elara was consulting for Sterling West, his panic exploded. You're using him to get back at me, he accused. You're embarrassing me. Elara simply replied, I'm working. And for once, it was the truth. Every interaction with Julian reinforced what she'd lost and what she'd never truly had. Respect. Partnership. Safety. One evening after a late strategy session, Julian walked her to the elevator. The space between them felt charged. You don't owe anyone your silence anymore, he said quietly. You never did. The words hit her harder than any apology Mark had ever offered. That night, Elara cried. Not out of heartbreak, but out of release. She was finally seen. The fallout didn't take long to arrive. Mark showed up at Elara's temporary apartment unannounced. He looked disheveled, nothing like the polished executive she'd once admired. You think you've won? He snapped, pacing the room. You think Julian actually cares about you? He's using you. Elara listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend herself. When he finally stopped talking, she spoke calmly. You cheated on me, she said. You lied to me for months. And now you're angry because I stopped making myself small. That was when Mark exploded. He admitted everything. The affair hadn't been nothing. It had been reckless, public, and dangerously close to violating company policy. What Mark didn't know, what he never imagined, was that Julian already knew. Sterling West had strict rules about workplace relationships, especially when power dynamics were involved. The next week, Mark was quietly let go. No scandal. No second chances. Julian never mentioned it to Elara. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Mark's career collapsed almost overnight. The man who once looked down on Elara now begged her to speak to Julian on his behalf. She refused, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. The divorce was swift, clean, final. For the first time in years, Elara felt free. Months passed. Elara's life settled into a rhythm she barely recognized but loved. Her work with Julian expanded. She was no longer just a consultant. She was leading projects, making decisions, being trusted. Their relationship evolved slowly, carefully, built on respect rather than desperation. Julian never rushed her, never pressured her. He let her heal at her own pace. One evening, after a charity gala, everything changed. They stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The silence between them felt safe. I don't want to be your escape, Julian said quietly. I want to be your choice. That was the moment Elara knew. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't karma. This was something real. They didn't rush into anything. They took their time, learning each other without secrets or lies. When Julian finally asked her to marry him a year later, it wasn't extravagant. No headlines. No spectacle, just a simple question asked with sincerity and respect. She said yes, not because he was wealthy, not because he was powerful, but because he saw her. Looking back, Elara realized something important. Her husband cheating wasn't the worst thing that happened to her. Losing herself for years was. She didn't marry Julian because he was rich. She married him because he treated her like an equal, because he listened, because he respected her dreams instead of shrinking them. Sometimes betrayal isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the wake-up call that saves you. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps bring more real-life stories to light, and remember, never make yourself smaller for someone who benefits from your silence.